All right, let's just jump right into it. Think about these two images for a second. The Buddha, the ultimate symbol of peace and enlightenment. And then the battleship, a pure instrument of war. Now, what if I told you that in Meiji Japan, these two things, they kind of became one? It's a startling story, and that's what we're going to unpack today. So listen to this quote. "Killing and war are necessary." The really shocking part isn't the quote itself, but who said it. See, this wasn't some general or a politician. This was a justification for war written by Shaku Soen, a master in the Rimzai school of Zen Buddhism, of all people. And he wrote it to Leo Tolstoy, a famous pacifist. And that really brings us to the core question of this whole thing. I mean, how on earth does a religion fundamentally about peace end up justifying war? To get the answer, we've got to rewind the clock and go back to the very beginning of Japan's Meiji era. So before its big fall from grace, Buddhism in Japan was, well, it was unbelievably powerful. We're talking more than 200 years under the Tokugawa shogunate, where it was, for all intents and purposes, the state religion. Just look at that number. At its absolute peak, Japan had almost 500,000 Buddhist temples. And get this, every single household was legally required to belong to one. This basically turned priests into government bureaucrats. But as you can imagine, with all that power came corruption, a kind of spiritual rot. A day of reckoning was definitely on the horizon. And that day came in 1868, with something called the Meiji Restoration. This new government was driven by a hardcore Shinto nationalist ideology. They looked at Buddhism and saw it as this foreign, corrupting thing that came from China. So the goal became to cleanse the nation, to restore what they saw as a pure, divine Japanese identity. And this cleansing, wow, it was brutal and it was fast. This number you see here, that's how many temples were forcibly shut down. Priceless artifacts were just destroyed. Thousands of priests were kicked out and forced to become regular citizens. For the institution of Buddhism, this was nothing short of an existential crisis. So what do you do when you're faced with total annihilation? Well, the major Buddhist sects didn't really resist. No, instead, they made a very calculated choice. They were going to prove their loyalty to the exact same government that was trying to wipe them off the map. Their survival plan was pretty clever, in a way. First, they used their considerable wealth, basically bribing the new government with huge loans. Second, they tried to out-nationalist the nationalists, leading attacks on Christians to prove that they were the true defenders of Japan. And finally, they just pledged total, unwavering loyalty, declaring that the law of the Buddha and the law of the emperor, they were one and the same thing. So this desperate move to survive created something new, something powerful and, frankly, dangerous. It was this fusion of Buddhist teachings and the state's nationalist goals. People started calling it the imperial way. Buddhist scholars quickly got to work building the religious case for this new reality. They started arguing that since all Japanese people were descended from the divine emperor, the whole nation was like one big sacred family. So loyalty, that wasn't just a political choice, it was a holy duty. And sacrificing your life for the emperor, well, they said that was as easy as discarding worn-out sandals. And this thinking stretched all the way to foreign policy. The famous scholar D.T. Suzuki, who a lot of people in the West credit with introducing them to Zen, he argued that Japan's military expansion was actually a religious mission. He claimed that if any so-called lawless country got in the way of Japanese commerce, it wasn't just an economic issue, it was a crime against all of humanity. War was an aggression, it was a religious act. Now, this new ideology wasn't just some abstract theory. It was immediately put to use to justify Japan's growing number of military conflicts. It gave them this powerful moral and religious excuse for imperial expansion. And here's our friend Zen master Shaku Soen again. This time he's explaining the rationale during the Russo-Japanese War. He admits, yeah, war isn't evil, but then he completely reframes it. Japan's war, he says, is a necessary, even compassionate act. It's a war against evil itself, fought for civilization, peace, and enlightenment. This slide really shows the new framework perfectly. The priests basically created this distinction, a loophole. You've got your lawless war of aggression. That's bad, Buddhists should oppose that. But then you have a just war, one fought to stop suffering. Well, that's actually an act of compassion. And who gets to decide which is which? You guessed it, the state.
By the time we get to the Russo-Japanese War, the fusion is total. The scholar Inoue and Ryo just puts it bluntly. Russia is not only the enemy of our country, it is also the enemy of the Buddha. The enemies of the Japanese state were now officially the enemies of the Buddha, and the Japanese army was framed as the army of the Buddha, fighting a holy war.
But here's a question. Was this path unavoidable? Was literally every Buddhist on board with this? The answer is a hard no. And that brings us to the story of Uchiyama Gudo, a humble priest from the Soto Zen sect who reminds us that this collusion with the state, it was a choice, not an inevitability.
I mean, the contrast here could not be more stark. While the entire Buddhist establishment was preaching absolute loyalty, Gudo saw the emperor system as a tool of oppression. He wrote that the emperor wasn't a god, but the big boss of a corrupt system that exploited the poor. He actually based his anarcho-socialist ideas on what he saw as the original communal lifestyle of early Buddhists.
Well, for writing and printing these ideas from a secret press he ran out of his own temple, Gudo was arrested. He was implicated in a supposed plot to assassinate the emperor, convicted in a secret trial, and then executed in 1911. The message from the state was brutally, terrifyingly clear.
The execution of Gudo and the others sent this massive shockwave through the religious world in Japan. The state had just shown everyone the ultimate price of dissent. And the way institutional Buddhism responded, well, it pretty much locked in their path for the next 3.5 decades.
The reaction was immediate, and it was total. Gudo's own Soto Zen sect scrambled to issue an abject apology for ever having a guy like him in their ranks. The Rinzai sect condemned what it called the heretical idea of evil equality that socialists were pushing. I mean, every major sect basically fell all over themselves to pledge their absolute, unquestioning loyalty to the emperor, promising to police their own priests and root out any dangerous thoughts. The last nail was hammered into the coffin of religious independence.
So what are we left with? The story of Meiji Buddhism is this incredibly stark reminder of what can happen when a religious institution, facing what it thinks is its own extinction, decides to trade its moral authority for state protection. And it leaves us with this haunting question, one that applies to any era, really. When faith and the state become one, who's left to hold whom accountable?